Welcome and thank you for stopping by Sheila's Audiobooks, and I am Sheila. This recording is coming from South Texas. All stories on this recording are in the public domain per United States copyright law. This story is about written over 100 years ago. Edgar Wallace's genius was not intended to be taken entirely seriously, but rather as a kind of light-hearted piece of satire, mocking the vanity and futility of European efforts to impose alien laws and customs upon the indigenous peoples of Africa. His humorous dialogue, his remarkable skill in crafting an entertaining short story, and the superlative wit which characterizes his style. The Forest of Happy Dreams. Sanders was tied up at a wooding, being on his way to collect taxes and administer justice to the folk who dwell on the lower Ississippi River. By the riverside the little steamer was moored. There was a tiny bay here, and the swift currents of the river were broken to a gentle flow. Nonetheless, he inspected the shore ends of the wire hawsers before he crossed the narrow plank that led to the deck of the Zaire. The wood was stacked on the deck, ready for tomorrow's run. The new water gauge had been put in by Yoka, the engineer, as he had ordered. The engines had been cleaned, and Sanders nodded approvingly. He stepped lightly over 2 or 3 sleeping forms curled up on the deck, and gained the shore. "Now I think I'll turn in," he muttered, and looked at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. He stood for a moment on the crest of the steep bank, and stared back across the river. The night was black, but he saw the outlines of the forest on the other side. He saw the jeweled sky, and the pale reflection of stars in the water. Then he went to his tent, and leisurely got into his pajamas. He jerked 2 tabloids from a tiny bottle, swallowed them, drank a glass of water, and thrust his head through the tent opening. "Ho, Sokani!" he called, speaking in the vernacular, let the low collie sound. He went to bed. He heard the rustle of men moving, the gurgles of laughter as his subtle joke was repeated, for the Campbell people have a keen sense of humor, and then the penetrating rattle of sticks on the native drum, a hollow tree trunk. Fiercely it beat, furiously, breathlessly, with now and then a deeper note as the drummer, using all his art, sent the message of sleep to the camp. In one wild crescendo, the low collie ceased, and Sanders turned with a sigh of content and closed his eyes. He sat up suddenly. He must have dozed, but he was wide awake now. He listened, then slipped out of bed, pulling on his mosquito boots. Into the darkness of the night he stepped, and found Nkma, the engineer, waiting. "You heard, master?" said the native. "I heard," said Sanders, with a puzzled face, "yet we are nowhere near a village." He listened. From the night came 100 whispering noises, but above all these, unmistakable, the faint clatter of an answering drum. The white man frowned in his perplexity. "No village is nearer than the Bongindanga," he muttered, "not even a fishing village. The woods are deserted." The native held up a warning finger, and bent his head, listening. He was reading the message that the drum sent. Sanders waited. He knew the wonderful fact of this native telegraph, how it sent news through the trackless wilds. He could not understand it, no European could, but he had respect for its mystery. "A white man is here," read the native, "he has the sickness." A white man. In the darkness Sanders' eyebrows rose incredulously. "He is a foolish one," Nkma read, "he sits in the forest of happy thoughts, and will not move." Sanders clicked his lips impatiently. "No white man would sit in the forest of happy thoughts," he said, half to himself, "unless he were mad." But the distant drum monotonously repeated the outrageous news. Here, indeed, in the heart of the loveliest glade in all Africa, encamped in the very center of the green path of death, was a white man, a sick white man, in the forest of happy thoughts, a sick white man. So the drum went on, till Sanders, rousing his own low collie man, sent an answer crashing along the river, and began to dress hurriedly. In the forest lay a very sick man. He had chosen the site for the camp himself. It was in a clearing, near a little creek that wound between high elephant grass to the river. Mainwood chose it, just before the sickness came, because it was pretty. This was altogether an inadequate reason, but Mainwood was a sentimentalist, and his life was a long record of choosing pretty camping places, irrespective of danger. He was, said a newspaper, commenting on the crowning disaster which sent him a fugitive from justice to the wild lands of Africa, overburdened with imagination. Mainwood was cursed with ill-timed confidence. This was one of the reasons he chose to linger in that deadly strip of land of the Ituri, which is clumsily named by the natives the lands where all bad thoughts become good thoughts, and poetically adapted by explorers and daring traders as the Forest of Happy Dreams. Overconfidence had generally been Mainwood's undoing. Overconfidence in the ability of his horses to win races, overconfidence in his own ability to secure money to hide his defalcations. He was a director in the Welsh County Bank once. Overconfidence in securing the love of a woman, who, when the crash came, looked at him blankly and said she was sorry, but she had no idea he felt towards her like that. Now Mainwood lifted his aching head from the pillow and cursed aloud at the din. He was endowed with the smattering of pidgin English which a man may acquire from a 3-month sojourn divided between Sierra Leone and Grand Bassam. "Why for they make 'em cursed noise, eh?" he fretted. "You plenty fool man, a baibu." "Si, senor," agreed the Kano boy, calmly. "Stop it, do you hear? Stop it," raved the man on the tumbled bed. "This noise is driving me mad. Tell them to stop the drum." The locally stopped of its own accord, for the listeners in the sick man's camp had heard the faint answer from Sanders. "Come here, Abibu, I want some milk, open a fresh tin, and tell the cook I want some soup, too." The servant left him muttering and tossing from side to side on the creaking camp bedstead. Mainwood had many strange things to think about. It was strange how they all clamored for immediate attention, strange how they elbowed and fought one another in their noisy claims to his notice. Of course, there was the bankruptcy and the discovery at the bank. It was very decent of that inspector fellow to clear out, and Ethel, and the horses, and the Valley of Happy Dreams. That would make a good story if Mainwood could write, only, unfortunately, he could not write. He could sign things, sign his name 3 months after date, pay to the order of. He could sign other people's names. He groaned, and winced at the thought. But here was a forest where bad thoughts became good, and, God knows, his mind was ill-furnished. He wanted peace and sleep and happiness. He greatly desired happiness. Now suppose Fairy Lane had won the Wokingham Stakes? It had not, of course. He winced again at the bad memory, but suppose it had? Suppose he could have found a friend who would have lent him £16,000, or even if Ethel. "Master," said Abibu's voice, "dem puck, him lib for come." "Eh, what's that?" Mainwood turned almost savagely on the man. "Puck, you hear 'em?" But the sick man could not hear the smack of the Zaire's stern wheel, as the little boat breasted the downward rush of the river. He was surprised to see that it was dawn, and grudgingly admitted to himself that he had slept. He closed his eyes again and had a strange dream. The principal figure was a small, tanned, clean-shaven man in a white helmet, who wore a dingy yellow overcoat over his pajamas. "How are you feeling?" said the stranger. "Rotten bad," growled Mainwood, "especially about Ethel. Don't you think it was pretty low down of her to lead me on to believe she was awfully fond of me, and then at the last minute to chuck me?" "Shocking," said the strange, white man gravely, "but put her out of your mind just now. She isn't worth troubling about. What do you say to this?" He held up a small, greenish pellet between his forefinger and thumb, and Mainwood laughed weakly. "Oh, rot." He chuckled faintly. "You're one of those Forest of Happy Dreams Johnnies. What's that? A love philtre?" He was hysterically amused at the witticism. Sanders nodded. "Love or life, it's all one," he said, but apparently unamused. "Swallow it." Mainwood giggled and obeyed. "And now," said the stranger, this was 6 hours later, "the best thing you can do is to let my boys put you on my steamer and take you down river." Mainwood shook his head. He had awakened irritable and lamentably weak. "My dear chap, it's awfully kind of you to have come. By the way, I suppose you are a doctor?" Sanders shook his head. "On the contrary, I am the commissioner of this district," he said flippantly. "But you were saying—" "I want to stay here, it's devilish pretty." "Devilish is the very adjective I should have used, my dear man. This is the plague spot of the Congo. It's the home of every death-dealing fly and bug in Africa." He waved his hand to the hidden vistas of fresh green glades, of gorgeous creepers shown in the light of the campfires. "Look at the grass," he said, It's homeland grass, that's the seductive part of it. I nearly camped here myself. Come, my friend, let me take you to my camp. Mainwood shook his head obstinately. I'm obliged, but I'll stay here for a day or so. I want to try the supernatural effects of this pleasant place, he said with a weary smile. I've got so many thoughts that need treatment. Look here, said Sanders roughly, you know jolly well how this forest got its name. It is called Happy Dreams because it's impregnated with fever, and with every disease from beriberi to sleeping sickness. You don't wake from the dreams you dream here. Man, I know this country, and you're a newcomer. You've trekked here because you wanted to get away from life and start all over again. I beg your pardon. Mainwood's face flushed, and he spoke a little stiffly. Oh, I know all about you. Didn't I tell you I was the commissioner? I was in England when things were going rocky with you, and I've read the rest in the papers I get from time to time. But all that is nothing to me. I'm here to help you start fair. If you had wanted to commit suicide, why come to Africa to do it? Be sensible and shift your camp. I'll send my steamer back for your men. Will you come? No, said Mainwood sulkily. I don't want to. I'm not keen. Besides, I'm not fit to travel. Here was an argument which Sanders could not answer. He was none too sure upon that point himself, and he hesitated before he spoke again. Very well, he said at length, suppose you stay another day to give you a chance to pull yourself together. I'll come along tomorrow with a tip-top invalid chair for you. Is it a bet? Mainwood held out his shaking hand, and the ghost of a smile puckered the corners of his eyes. It's a bet, he said. He watched the commissioner walk through the camp, speaking to one man after another in a strange tongue. A singular, masterful man this, thought Mainwood. Would he have mastered Ethel? He watched the stranger with curious eyes, and noted how his own lazy devils of carriers jumped at his word. Good night, said Sanders' voice, and Mainwood looked up. You must take another of these pellets, and tomorrow you'll be as fit as a donkey engine. I've got to get back to my camp tonight, or I shall find half my stores stolen in the morning, but if you'd rather I stopped. No, no, replied the other hastily. He wanted to be alone. He had lots of matters to settle with himself. There was the question of Ethel, for instance. You won't forget to take the tabloid? No. I say, I'm awfully obliged to you for coming. You've been a good white citizen. Sanders smiled. Don't talk nonsense, he said good-humoredly. This is all brotherly love. White to white, and kin to kin, don't you know? We're all alone here, and there isn't a man of our color within 500 miles. Good night, and please take the tabloid. Mainwood lay listening to the noise of departure. He thought he heard a little bell tingle. That must be for the engines. Then he heard the puck-a-puck of the wheel, so that was how the steamer got its name. A Bible came with some milk. You take our medicine, master? He inquired. I take murmured Mainwood, but the green tabloid was underneath his pillow. Then there began to steal over him a curious sensation of content. He did not analyze it down to its first cause. He had had sufficient introspective exercise for one day. It came to him as a pleasant shock to realize that he was happy. He opened his eyes and looked round. His bed was laid in the open, and he drew aside the curtains of his net to get a better view. A little man was walking briskly toward him along the velvet stretch of grass that sloped down from the glade, and Mainwood whistled. Attorney, he gasped. By all that's wonderful. Attorney, indeed, it was, the same wizened attorney as of yore, but no longer pulling the long face to which Mainwood had been accustomed. The little man was in his white riding breeches, his diminutive top boots were splashed with mud, and on the crimson of his silk jacket there was evidence of a hard race. He touched his cap jerkily with his whip, and shifted the burden of the racing saddle he carried to the other arm. Why, attorney, said Mainwood, with a smile, what on earth are you doing here? It's a short way to the jockey's room, sir, said the little man. I've just weighed in. I thought the fairy would do it, sir, and she did. Mainwood nodded wisely. I knew she would, too, he said. Did she give you a smooth ride? The jockey grinned again. She never does that, he said. But she ran gamely enough. Coming up out of the dip, she hung a little, but I showed her the whip, and she came on as straight as a die. I thought once the stork would beat us. I got shut in, but I pulled her round, and we were never in difficulties. "I could have won by 10 lengths, said Attorney. "You could have won by 10 lengths, repeated Mainwood in wonder. "Well, you've done me a good turn, Attorney. This win will get me out of one of the biggest holes that ever a reckless man tumbled into. I shall not forget you, Attorney." "I'm sure you won't, sir," said the little jockey gratefully, "if you'll excuse me now, sir." Mainwood nodded and watched him, as he moved quickly through the trees. There were several people in the glade now, and Mainwood looked down ruefully at his soiled duck suit. "What an ass I was to come like this," he muttered in his annoyance. "I might have known that I should have met all these people." There was one he did not wish to see, and as soon as he sighted Ven, with his shy eyes and his big nose, Mainwood endeavored to slip back out of observation. But Ven saw him, and came tumbling through the trees, with his big, flabby hand extended and his dull eyes aglow. "Hello, hello." He grinned. "Been looking for you." Mainwood muttered some inconsequent reply. "Wrong place to find you, eh?" Ven removed his shining silk hat and mopped his brow with an awesome silk handkerchief. "But look here, old fella, about that money?" "Don't worry, my dear man," Mainwood interposed easily. "I shall pay you now." "That ain't what I mean," said the other impetuously. "A few hundred more or less does not count." "But you wanted a big sum. And you told me you'd see me." I know," Ven put in hastily, "but that was before Kaffers started jumping. Old fella, you can have it." He said this with grotesque emphasis, standing with his legs wide apart, his hat perched on the back of his head, his plump hands dramatically outstretched, and Mainwood laughed outright. 16,000? he asked. "Or 20, said the other impressively. "I want to show you," somebody called him, and with a hurried apology he went blundering up the green slope, stopping and turning back to indulge in a little dumb show illustrative of his confidence in Mainwood and his willingness to oblige. Mainwood was laughing, a low, gurgling laugh of pure enjoyment. Ven, of all people. Ven, with his accursed questions and talk of securities. Well. Then his merriment ceases, and he winced again, and his heart beat faster and faster, and a curious weakness came over him. How splendidly cool she looked. She walked in the clearing, a white, slim figure. He heard the swish of her skirt as she came through the long grass, white, with a green belt all encrusted with gold embroidery. He took in every detail hungrily, the dangling gold ornaments that hung from her belt, the lace collar at her throat, She did not hurry to him, that was not her way. But in her eyes dawned a gradual tenderness, those dear eyes that dropped before his shyly. "Ethel," he whispered, and dared to take her hand. "Aren't you wonderfully surprised?" she said. "Ethel. Here. I had to come." She would not look at him, but he saw the pink in her cheek and heard the faltering voice with a wild hope. "I behaved so badly, dear, so very badly." She hung her head. Dear, he muttered, and groped toward her like a blind man. She was in his arms, crushed against his breast, the perfume of her presence in his brain. "I had to come to you." Her hot cheek was against his. "I love you so." "Me, love me? Do you mean it?" He was tremulous with happiness, and his voice broke. "Dearest." Her face was upturned to his, her lips so near, he felt her heart beating as furiously as his own. He kissed her lips, her eyes, her dear hair. "Oh, God, I'm happy," she sobbed, so happy. Sanders sprang ashore just as the sun was rising, and came thoughtfully through the undergrowth to the camp. Abibu, squatting by the curtained bed, did not rise. Sanders walked to the bed, pulled aside the mosquito netting, and bent over the man who lay there. Then he drew the curtains again, lit his pipe slowly, and looked down at Abibu. "When did he die?" he asked. "In the dark of the morning, master," said the man. Sanders nodded slowly. "Why did you not send for me?" For a moment the squatting figure made no reply, then he rose and stretched himself. "Master," he said, speaking in Arabic, which is a language which allows of nice distinctions, "this man was happy, he walked in the forest of happy thoughts. Why should I call him back to a land where there was neither sunshine nor happiness, but only night and pain and sickness?" "You're a philosopher," said Sanders irritably. "I am a follower of the Prophet," said Abibu, the Kano boy, "and all things are according to God's wisdom." Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really hoped you enjoyed it. There will be more to come. Please subscribe not to miss out on what is next. I will be looking forward to your return. The music is by Madfan from Pixabay. To support this and other artists, go to pixabay.com. Sheila.